Welcome back to our study of the Heavenly Family in the Old Testament. This week's reading is heavy on history, but there are still several notes to make on the Heavenly Family.
Right, so 1 Samuel 17:26 records David's taunt against Goliath, that he defies the armies of the living God. The Hebrew expression for living God here is Elohim Chaim, and both of these words are plural. Elohim, of course, means gods, plural, but we're used to considering it as if it were singular when it refers to the God of Israel. It's translated as gods, plural, whenever it's thought to refer to other gods. But this verse in 1 Samuel is one of those places where the grammar gives away the more ancient understanding that there really were gods, plural, in Israel's theology. Chaim is also plural, lives or living beings. So paired with Elohim, it means the living gods, plural. In other places, like Joshua 3:10, we find both these words in their singular form, El Chai, same translation, the living God, but both words are singular. And the rationalization for this is that whether it's singular or plural, either way it's a title, so it just means God.
Latter-day Saints, however, had the benefit of Abraham 4, where the gods, plural, go down to organize the world. They counsel among themselves and so forth. So that for us, the explanation for the plural terminology for God that occurs here and there in the Bible is quite straightforward. It is residual from a time when ancient Israelites knew that God was plural. God was Father, Mother, and Son. And even the heavenly hosts are described as gods as well in places like Psalms 82. But later scribes, priests, and kings tried to cover that up.
Now, as a matter of convention these days, Latter-day Saints use the term Elohim to mean God the Father and Jehovah to mean the Son of God. But we must always remember that this is a modern convention meant to help us be clear who we're talking about in the Godhead when we talk with each other. Okay? And this goes back to an official statement by the First Presidency in 1916. But the Scriptures don't abide by this modern naming convention. The Scriptures, of course, much more complicated. Sometimes Yahweh is Jesus Christ, sometimes it's Heavenly Father. We've mentioned Genesis 19:24, where they're both there in the same verse, when Yahweh on earth, Jesus Christ, rains fire onto Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh in heaven, the Father. Likewise, Elohim is sometimes singular and sometimes plural.
And then there are just many times when we just can't tell, and that's okay.
Yeah. Now, let's touch on a few things we've addressed before that pop up in the storyline in this week's reading.
In 1 Samuel 20, we see David making an excuse for not being at Saul's new moon feast because his family is holding a sacrifice of their own there in Bethlehem. But of course, this is a sacrifice that Josiah would later ban and retroactively insert into the regulations of Deuteronomy.
In 1 Samuel 22:6, we find that Saul abode or dwelt in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. So this is the same scene, and in fact, the same place as Deborah in Judges 4:5. And she dwelt, it's the same word, Yashab, under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in Mount Ephraim. And the children of Israel went up to her for judgment. So Saul, like Deborah before him, is there dwelling under a tree in this official capacity, judging and administering the kingdom.
And both those place names, Gibeah and Ramah, mean a high place. In fact, in every other instance, the word Ramah is translated as a high place shrine in the King James Version. So it's clear that he is administering the kingdom from the high place shrine in Gibeah.
Then we have the fun exchange between Saul and the witch of Endor.
Mm-hmm. Saul asks her to call up the ghost of Samuel, and as far as the text is concerned, that is exactly what she does, which has caused endless debates. Can a sorcerer really command the dead to appear? What was Samuel doing that she interrupted? Was he just resting? That's not the picture that we Latter-day Saints have of the condition of the departed in the spirit world. Or did an evil spirit come pretending to be Samuel and pretending to be upset by her disturbing his rest?
Good acting on his part. If so, well, we just don't have the answer. But there is something useful to us here. Saul asks the sorceress what the spirit looked like. Verse 13, what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And then she describes an old man covered in a mantle that both she and Saul recognized that this is Samuel. But then, what did she mean saying that she saw gods ascending from the earth? Well, the word here is Elohim. I saw Elohim ascending out of the earth. But this is not the God of Israel coming up out of Sheol, the realm of the dead. Rather, it's one of several instances of the spirits of mortals being called gods. All right. Why would the Bible ever call men gods?
Because as sons and daughters of Heavenly Mother and Heavenly Father, we mortals can be called gods, members of the divine counsel of God from the beginning.
And if we continue in the discipline of God in this life and beyond, it is our destiny to grow brighter and brighter until the perfect day, the full realization of our divine potential, to be fully as our heavenly parents are.
In 1 Samuel 31, when the inhabitants of Gilead heard that Saul and Jonathan had been killed and their bodies mutilated by the Philistines, valiant men stole into enemy territory and retrieved the bodies. And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days.
So we have a burial under a tree, and we've seen this before. Deborah, the nurse of Rebekah. Not a common thing in the Bible, but quite clearly a solemn act indicating that certain trees could be symbolically sacred. The tree at Bethel, where Rebekah was buried, was clearly considered sacred because of where it stood, at Bethel, the house of God, where Jacob saw the Lord and angels ascending and descending out of heaven.
The Samuel account doesn't necessarily suggest that the tree in Jabesh was a sacred tree. It just says under a tree. But the Chronicles account shows that yes, this was a sacred tree. In that telling, the valiant men took the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh and buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh.
Yeah, the phrase ha'elah, the oak. And of course, the connection to the sacred tree, the connection of sacred trees to Heavenly Mother is right there in this word. Ha'elah, the oak. Well, Allah doesn't just mean oak or tamarisk or whatever it meant, but it's also the feminine form of El, God. Allah is the sacred oak and is the name of Heavenly Mother, whose most enduring symbol has been the tree of life.
So to bury someone's remains under a sacred tree, then, is to symbolically return them to her. Returning to the tree of life represents our return to God and into immortality.
After conquering Jerusalem, David goes to fetch the ark from where it's been ever since it was brought back by the Philistines after it caused them boils and emerods. Where particularly had it been? In Baal Judah, the gods of Judah, where Baalim is the word for gods.
What?
Yeah.
The ark's been resting in a place named after Baal?
Yes. Elsewhere, this same exact place is called the city of Baal, Kirjath Baal. That's in Joshua 18. That's where the ark stood all those years since it was returned after being recaptured or captured by the Philistines in the days of Eli, in the city of Baal. So it's just a reminder that Baal was a perfectly fine name for God until it was not.
If you didn't see the episode on Baal that we did as a supplement for this week, it's important. The overlap between Yahweh and Baal and the fact that Baal was a legitimate Hebrew title for God at one time, is part of the proof that Yahweh was the son of the divine father El Elyon and the divine mother Ashvatah.
So besides Baal as a legitimate name for God, we touched on the plural meaning of the name Elohim. We saw that the spirits of mortals like Samuel could be termed Elohim, gods, and it won't be the last time by any means that we see that.
We found Saul performing his official duties under a tree like Deborah had done centuries earlier, and then Saul and his sons were solemnly buried under a sacred tree.
Well, thanks for spending this short time with us. We look forward to next week's episode exploring the Heavenly Family in the Old Testament.